Week 14 of fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. The first quarterback, Tyrod Taylor of the New York Jets. Tyrod Taylor, he's been playing good football since he's been in the starting lineup. And this New York Jet team, I don't know, they don't have much on the offense, but Taylor's made the most of his opportunity over the last few weeks, including winning that ball game in Week 13 versus the Atlanta Falcons. The last few games here for Tyrod Taylor. 12 of Baltimore. He came in as the starter. He started that game, 222 pass yards, touchdown, interception, 19 rush yards in Week 13. Versus the Falcons, 172 pass yards, a touchdown, 44 rush yards, and a rushing touchdown. So Week 14, a good matchup versus the Dolphins that give up the ninth most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And Tyrod Taylor, like I said, he has some rushing upside ability. I know they got young receivers in John Mechie and Donnie Mitchell is this New York Jet team. But him and Taylor's been on the same page with these guys, and this New York Jet offense obviously runs way better with Taylor in there in the lineup than Justin Fields, who was just all over the place this season. So Taylor, 2 decent games in a row he's coming off, and a pretty good matchup versus the Dolphins in Week 14. Definitely a quarterback to add this week, and he's available in 96% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback, Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers. This Panther team was off another upset, and they're a way better home team than they've been on the road this season. And Bryce Young, last 2 out of 3 games, 25 or more fantasy points in those games for Young. Week 11 at Atlanta, 448 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, a 2-point conversion. Week 12 at the Niners, a bad game, 169 pass yards, a touchdown, 2 interception, 15 rush yards. In Week 13 versus the Rams, 206 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, 23 rush yards. I know Bryce Young, he's going on by. And then he's got a good matchup for the playoffs, the first 2 weeks of the playoffs, Week 15 in New Orleans and Week 16 versus Tampa Bay. So if you want to stash Bryce Young on your roster, like I said, where he's got good matchups coming up for the playoffs, I think fantasy owners should do that. And like I said, he's been a way better quarterback at home for fantasy numbers instead on the road, and he's available right now in tons of fantasy leagues still is Bryce Young in 82%. Next quarterback, Marcus Mariota of the Washington Commanders. So Mariota, he went out there in a very tough matchup on Sunday Night Football in Week 13 versus the Denver Broncos, and he played it to the end, to the last play of the game in overtime, where the ball got batted down on a 2-point conversion where they went for the win, was Washington. So Mariota, I think, filling in for Jaden Daniels, even though they haven't won many ball games, is this Washington Commander team. He's played good football the last few weeks. Week 10 versus Detroit, 213 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 22 rush yards. Week 11 versus the Dolphins, 213 pass yards, a touchdown, interception, 49 rush yards. In Week 13 versus Denver, 294 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, and 55 rush yards. I know Jaden Daniels is a good possibility. Like I said, he could return. He's not the type of player that if he's healthy, he wants to go out there and play, even though this Commander team is 3-9 on the season. But Mariota, one of the better backups in the league, and Week 14 would be a pretty decent matchup at the Vikings. But like I said, if he went out there versus one of the best, if not the best defense in the league in the Denver Broncos, I think, and have a monster game in terms of fantasy numbers, I think he could go out there in Minnesota and have a good ball game and not deal with bad elements like the field was all ripped up all game long, and he still went out there in a good ball game versus the Denver Broncos. So if Mariota's in the lineup once again in Week 14 in Minnesota, definitely a quarterback to get, and he's out there in 90% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback, Shedeur Sanders of the Cleveland Browns. So far, it's been 2 mediocre fantasy games for Shedeur Sanders, but in terms of real life, we haven't seen much, I thought, out of Sanders. Yeah, he can make some throws that are difficult throws, no doubt about it, out of the pocket, but there's not a lot of help in that offense over there in the first 2 starts of his NFL career. Week 12 at Vegas, 209 pass yards, touchdown, interception. In Week 13 versus a well-coached San Francisco defense, even with Nick Bosa and Warner out for the season, there's still a tough matchup. 149 pass yards, a touchdown, 6 rush yards, and he took some big hits in that ball game. So Week 14 is a good streaming option, a great matchup versus the Titans that give up the 12th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season and can't stop anyone. So Shedeur right now out there in 92% of fantasy leagues. Like I said, he's got poise in the pocket and can make some difficult throws, but he's a week in and week out guy. It's tough to trust Sanders. But this week as a streaming option versus Tennessee Titans, definitely a guy to add, available 92% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback, another rookie, Tyler Show of the New Orleans Saints. A show he's gone out there and had a couple decent games this season is Tyler Shough. Week 10 at Carolina, 282 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 12 versus Atlanta, 243 pass yards, 22 rush yards, an interception, a fumble loss. In Week 13 in Miami, a good game it was for him. 239 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 18 rush yards, 2-point conversion in that ball game, and a fumble loss. So Week 14, it's a game most likely they'll be trailing and chasing points early and often at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But this Buc defense, they really can't stop anyone, and they've given up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Tyler Shuck, like I said, he's going out there, he's making plays. They got a true number 1 receiver in Chris Olave at least. Juwan Johnson, one of the better tight ends in fantasy this season, and he's making plays. And I think this week at Tampa, where they could be trailing, he could go out there and put some points on the board. Is Tyler Shuck, even though going back to Week 8 versus defense, it was a long day for him. And now won 128 pass yards, an interception, and 12 rush yards. But over the last 5-6 weeks, he's going out there, more poise in the pocket, more confidence, and he's running the offense pretty decently on the head coach Kellen Moore. So I think Shuck is a deep league ad, it's a decent ad, and he's available, like I said, in 93% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.